Tuesday night. And I've had more time this week to think than I probably normally do in my entire life. My youngest son, Amos, who has special needs, is at camp. This is his second camp this summer. And I talked to him tonight, and he is ready for me to come and pick him up. No, I think he's having fun, but he's homesick. So anyway, he has autism and a genetic disorder, and he takes up a tremendous amount of my time. So when he's not here, I have more time to think. And my middle son is here as well, and so that's been nice. But Amos is also at camp. My daughter is at camp. So not only do I have time, but I have two people currently at camp. And as I said last night, we're a camp family. And I talked about Camp Mystic. And I was like, okay, I've talked about Camp Mystic, I'm not gonna keep harping about Camp Mystic. And I'm back tonight to talk about Camp Mystic. I why is this doing this? I just have such a need to get to talk through some of this stuff. It's really important to me. So if you don't want to talk about Camp Mystic or don't want to listen about Camp Mystic, then I suggest you turn Adrian off, because that's what we're about to talk about. Camp Mystic, which is located in an area called Flash Flood Alley. Flash Flood Alley. Flash Flood Alley. We are 2 weeks out from the tragedy at Camp Mystic, a week ago Friday, so it'll be 2 weeks this Friday. And every day I kind of look for more news and watch things and listen, and we're continuing to hear from Carville City Manager. In every news conference, we just keep hearing, like, we're not answering questions about our response. We're focusing on search and rescue, which is good to focus on search and rescue. But are we focusing on search and rescue because we don't want to talk about our response? I gotta get the basement dwellers out of here. I mean, you could be doing anything and you are not. So if you have not subscribed, you want to be, because you can comment if you're a subscriber. Unless you're a bad one, then you just get deleted. So Mayor Herring of Carville said, I found this quote: "I wish to God there had been some way to warn Jane Ragsdale and Dick Eastland. Please pray for our community. I wish to God there had been some way to warn them." Kerr. That's interesting, because we have a car. That's how we say it here. I wish to God there had been some way to warn them. At 1:14 a.m., the National Weather Service pushed out its very first flash flood warning for central Kerr County. And it said specifically, life-threatening flash flooding was occurring or would begin soon. Yet you have the mayor saying, I wish to God there had been some way to warn them. They were warned. The mayor woke up. The city manager was out on a jog at 3:30, said he didn't see anything. He woke up the mayor around 4:30, and the mayor said, we did not know, I wasn't alerted, I had received 0 alerts beforehand, they did not come. Kerr County Judge Rob Kelly said the day after the flood, the same day of the flood, we didn't know this flood was coming. He then said, we do not have a warning system. So Kerr County Judge Rob Kelly is the area's top emergency management official. we do not have a warning system. It's not true. They did not use the warning system that they had. And I really am not placing blame, but you can't lie. You have to be honest. And I don't have a child that died in this camp. I don't know anything about this camp, but I sure am an advocate for families. And if I were a family and I were burying my child or children, and somebody said, we don't have a warning system. We didn't know the flood was coming. I wish to God there had been a way to warn them. I would have been like, I'm going to string you up by your toenails and flog you. Right? Because all those things are lies. Just say, we're terrible. We're going to go ahead and own it. We're terrible. Don't lie. Don't lie. Judge Rob Kelly, the county sheriff, or the emergency management coordinator have done any interviews. So they said all this stuff, and now they're not doing interviews because they're not doing interviews. So at 1:14 a.m., the National Weather Service pushed out its first flash flood warning, saying that data indicates life-threatening flash flooding was occurring or would begin soon. And there's some that say, well, there's no cell service there. Well, I live in rural eastern North Carolina. One of the young ladies that goes to Baylor had her phone because she was in charge of social media for the camp. She ended up on the roof and was able to text her mother at 5 a.m. from camp. Text her mother, from camp. So she had a cell service. She had service. Russell Crowley. Okay, Mom. Get my teenager to take the dog out. A mother is asking for people to find her daughter's favorite stuffed monkey. Gracious. Gracious. Yes, the counselor had a phone, but I think what we were hearing is that there was no cell service. So I guess what I'm saying is there was some cell service because the counselor used her phone from Camp Mystic to reach out to her parents. And you have this mayor who says, we did not know, I wasn't alerted, I had received 0 alerts beforehand, they did not come. So a flood watch that did come, the day before it started, but 1:14 a.m., the flood watch said it's to indicate to local emergency officials, not just citizens, but local emergency officials, so that they should be on the lookout along with other people. And there's no way to forecast a flood because where exactly the rain falls makes a difference in the river forecasting. So there was this great NOAA meteorologist, and he really dug into it. His name's Alan Gerard. He said, I look at flash flood events like this very similarly to tornadoes. We can tell you the conditions are favorable, but we can't tell you exactly how strong the tornado is going to be and whether or not it's going to hit your house. So instead, we get a tornado watch. And if you get a tornado warning, what do? You go down into your basement. I remember at least 3 times, my husband and I, we knew there was a tornado watch. One of us would stay up. When the warning came, I remember getting 2 children out of cribs and another one to go down into our basement. Kerr County is part of the Texas Hill Country. So there are these limestone hills, and they don't have a bunch of soil, it's limestone. So they don't absorb water, and rivers rise fast, which is called why it's called Flash Flood Alley, the most dangerous um, flood valley in the country. That's all you can do. You get the warning. Bob Henson, he's a meteorologist with Yale at Yale Climate Connections. He said, that far ahead of an event like this, that's the most you can do. They did the best they could do. Dan, I'm using the example of the basement of what you do if there is a tornado warning. You go in your basement. If there is a flood warning, what do? You move to higher ground. It's an analogy. The agent issued increasingly urgent. Yes, you watch for a warning. That's how I remember it. So if you see a watch, you're watching for a warning because a warning is worse. The agent issued increasingly urgent warnings through the night, which should have given most people enough to escape death if they received and understood them. That was a climate scientist. If you're warned of a coming flood, you could walk to higher ground, right? In 1932, when the last flood happened at Camp Mystic, that I think at least 2 cabins were destroyed in that flood. There was this newspaper, and in the newspaper said if 7 people died in that flood, not at Camp Mystic, but downstream a little bit. But they said it would have been a lot worse if it happened overnight. You know, a lot worse happened overnight. Swain, the same Daniel Swain at the University of California, he said, this really does appear to be a case where had there been even a modest acknowledgement of the level of danger that was predicted by the Weather Service, I don't think much of the scope of loss of life would have happened. At 4:03 in the morning, 2 hours and 49 minutes after the initial flood warning, federal forecasters said the rain had created a flash flood emergency. Weather forecasters only use that term in exceedingly rare cases to indicate that lives are particularly at risk. It said this is a particularly dangerous situation, seek higher ground now. So in the 3 hours since the warning went out, the river had risen 14 feet. So I think before we were hearing 27 feet in 45 minutes. We know now that's not true. It was 14.3 feet in 3 hours. And then it would rise another 15 feet before the gauge broke. Okay. So they had about 2 more hours. So it was not as fast as we first thought. And that's a hard thing to talk about because I think when we heard 27 feet in 45 minutes, and now we're hearing 27, well, we're hearing 29 feet basically. 29 feet in 4.5 hours. It's a lot, but it's not in 45 minutes. It wasn't until 5:34 in the morning that the Kerr County Sheriff's Office put a message up on Facebook, and it said dangerous flooding now. Now, the city manager who had been out jogging at 3:30 said, I didn't see any flooding. But at 5:30, he called the mayor and said, ooh, there's a lot of water in the downtown park downtown. Now, this same mayor is the one that said, what? What did the mayor say? I wish to God there had been some way to warn them about his camp director friends. We did not know. We did not know. I wasn't alerted. I had received zero alerts beforehand. They did not come. We do not have a warning system. So at this point, these are the city officials. What should they have been doing? Listening to a weather radio, communicating with the National Weather Service. I can think of a lot of things. They could have been doing. Why? Why does it matter? Because there were these beautiful little girls, Hannah and Rebecca Lawrence, 8-year-old twins, Mary Kate Jacob, 8, Lila Bonner, 9, Lenny McCown, 8, her counselor, Chloe Childress. What about Blakely McCrory? Blakely McCrory was dropped off at camp by her mom, who's my age, 50 years old, has an 8-year-old. Blakely's dad died in March unexpectedly. His name is Blake. And her mom, who went to, Camp Mystic, was excited for Blakely to go to Camp Mystic, has now lost her only child. And she's 50. There won't be any more children for her. She won't be a grandmother. She won't help somebody pick out a dress for prom. She won't send her to camp. It's over for her. Motherhood is over for Blakely's mom. And she matters. These kids matter. So when you go to Camp Mystic had a liability waiver. It's really interesting. I found it today. And here's what it said. As with all adventures, campers will be exposed to certain risk, not including uncertain terrain, the river and river frontage, heat, cold, rain, floods, and lightning. So there was a liability waiver. Your camper is going to be exposed to these things. "21 campers and 6 counselors killed at Camp Mystic." In statesman.com, it's like a Texas publication. I really thought this was great. It was published on July 7th. It said a successful disaster response to the Kerr County floods would have looked something like this. In the days and hours leading up to July 4th, the National Weather Service, meteorologists, and analysts monitoring gauges in the Guadalupe River would produce a forecast of expected conditions on the ground. The local National Weather Service would then issue appropriately serious alerts in time for officials to mobilize a response. Additional warnings would directly inform nearby citizens, giving them ample opportunity to seek higher ground. Leaders of Camp Mystic would activate an emergency plan. An emergency plan which is required. Theirs was checked 2 days before. The state of Texas came by because they are a licensed camp, even though they're not accredited by the National Camp Association. They are accredited. They are licensed. And the people went through 2 days before and reviewed their emergency plan. The emergency plan would describe how an evacuation would proceed. So the emergency plan not only had to be posted, it had to be followed. And if that had all happened, nobody would have died. Right? So there's this big thing of they had an emergency plan. Well, I know I'm not the smartest knife in the drawer, but if anybody wants to argue that they followed their emergency plan, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Because clearly they didn't. And when you wonder why get accredited, the Accreditation Association helps you do an emergency plan. Um, there was a counselor who had put up an Instagram post a day or two. Her name's Elizabeth Sweet. A day or two after this all happened, and she's now taken it down. I don't know why. Where are you getting this information from? Which information? Um, I don't. I don't know which information you're talking about. A thousand different sources. That's why I'm telling you, giving you the names of who is saying things. She wrote, while yesterday was the hardest day of my life and it will take a while to recover, I know that I have my mystic sisters to hold me up when I am down. We are truly better people for being there. We let Mystic bring out the best in us and we grew spiritually. Yesterday, I left a camp that was demolished and destroyed, but that is not the place I will remember for years to come. I will remember the place where we laughed on our way to our activities, sang as loud as we could in the dining hall, and cheered our hearts out for our respective tribes. So you have this counselor that was there. She's alive, Elizabeth Sweet, and that's what she's going to remember. Well, what is Blakely's mom going to remember? So, to me, if there was an emergency plan, this is what it should have said. If a flood warning is issued, every cabin located anywhere in the floodplain will be immediately evacuated, and every camper should be guided to higher ground above the floodplain and stay there until the flood warning expires. That's all that had to happen. At 1:14, when Dick Eastland got the weather alert, and he got it for people for a while, like they were asleep, they didn't get anything. He got the weather alert at 1:14. At 2 a.m., a counselor came up and said, "Hey, there's water in my cabin." He started evacuating the cabins closest to the river. This is true. The younger children weren't closest to the river, but they were in a low-lying area. So, but he didn't evacuate anybody until 2 a.m. So from 1:15 to 2 a.m., nothing happened. Nothing happened. So yeah, 2 days before, you can go and look at the inspection records online. DSHS, the state agency in charge of monitoring emergency preparedness, checked the camp for several items. They made sure the staff had been background checks, ensured sleeping areas were checked, water safety standards were met. Um, inspection records show that they had a written plan. Now, they didn't make copies of this plan, they just showed that it's all there. They had a written plan in case of disaster, serious accident, epidemic, or fatality formulated. I don't even know what that is. So, there was a written plan for this. All camp staff and volunteers learned about the plan during training and volunteer briefings. Documentation related to the plan was posted in an on site office. Um, their spokesperson, her name is Lara Anton, she said, "We do not maintain copies of every camp's emergency plan. We just evaluate them on site to make sure they comply with the Texas Administrative Code." So, as we're talking about this, there's still this like underlying undercurrent of it's too early to assign blame. But I would say it's also too early to say that this tragedy was unavoidable, right? And there are going to be more and more questions about not just could this have been mitigated, but how could it have been mitigated? How are camp leaders prepared for floods in an area known for floods? How do they receive the information? How do they use the information, heed warnings, and follow their own emergency plans? At 1:14 a.m., the first flash flood warning goes out. At 2:30 a.m., Genevieve Miller's counselor in Bug House at Camp Mystic. Bug House is the closest cabin. I can show you a picture of it, I think. Bug House is, let's see here. Bug House is over there, right there, at the top right. Bug House is the closest to the Guadalupe River. You can see down left is Bubble Inn. So those two cabins are where we had, where we lost the most campers, right? So blurry. At 2:30, Genevieve Miller's counselor wakes up. She sees water going into the cabin. She goes up to the office. Dick Eastland drives her, Genevieve, takes her back down there, drives, she's 12, drives Genevieve and other girls to safer ground. He does this continually. He's driving. This is at 2:30. At Gigglebox, the counselors can't open the doors. The water's rising. They can't open the doors. So they break open the back windows of the cabin and they start passing the girls through. Bertie Miller, who was 9, talked about how she and her campers held hands in this long chain as they went through water to get to higher ground. Dick Eastland ran over, the girls were losing their shoes. Dick Eastland ran over to one of the girls and handed her her shoe and said, "Okay, you girls, be safe," as he was heading to Bubble Inn, the cabin with the 8-year-olds. It was the last time anybody saw him alive. It was the last time. Bertie Miller and her bunkmates made this journey to the hilltop where they stayed the night. The older campers who were on Senior Hill, like in Cloud 9, the campers didn't even know what happened. They just thought, oh, there's a bad storm out there. They're reading books. They have absolutely no idea what happened. This Elizabeth Sweet, who we talked about, the Camp Mystic program director, she said she was woken up by a staff member at 3:11 a.m. to help evacuate campers from their cabins. But by 4 a.m., she was on the roof. Let me let the dog in. So at 1:15 a.m., they get the flood warning. At 2 before, how do you make somebody follow a warning? Follow a warning. At 4:03 a.m., 2 hours and 49 minutes later, this is a particularly dangerous situation. Seek higher ground now. For stealing all my cells, my internet. My cells, my internet. Hang on, let's see if this works. At 4 a.m., they have Doppler radar, rain gauges. There is massive amounts of flooding falling now, between 4 and 10 inches of rain, 2 to 4 inches an hour. Additional rainfall amounts of 2 to 4 inches are possible in the warned area. The flash flooding is already occurring. This is a flash flood emergency for South Central Kerr County, including Hunt. This is a particularly dangerous situation. Seek higher ground now. At 4:22 a.m., a volunteer firefighter in Ingram calls Kerr County Sheriff's Office and says, we can't get anywhere because of this flood. And he said, is there a way that we can send a code red to the residents in Hunt so we can tell them to find, to get higher or stay home? And the person said, well, we'll have to get approval for that. Because there was a notification system that allowed county authorities to send emergency alerts to people who have subscribed. There was also a system that would have sent out a warning, much like an Amber Alert, if you didn't subscribe. The sheriff was woken up at 4 a.m. The sheriff, who is a fairly important county official, is asleep. Asleep. Just asleep. Asleep. The sheriff is asleep. Between 4 and 5 a.m., the Kerrville police went door to door, waking up people, convincing them that they needed to leave. 100 homes were evacuated and 200 people were rescued. It wasn't until 5:30 a.m. that a social media post went up. I wish to God there had been some way to warn them, said Mayor Herring. We did not know. We did not know. I wasn't alerted. I received 0 alerts beforehand. They did not come. Kerr County Judge Rob Kelly said, we didn't know this flood was coming. We do not have a warning system. Ugh. Anyway, I just had to talk about it again. These little girls, Lainey Landry, Kellyanne Lytle, Virginia Hollis, Greta Toronzo. I just, this wasn't a freak accident. This is what happens when weather, weak infrastructure, not great warning systems, and adults who don't listen or follow emergency protocol. This is what happens. Summer camp. Summer camp could have been safe. And it wasn't. It wasn't. Anyway, that's it. I have 4 children, and they make my life so full. And I just, if I lost one of them, and I knew that it could have been prevented, I would want people to support me and help me and say, let their death not be in vain. What can we do so this doesn't happen again? So we can tell a story that says, hey, we got the alert at 1:14 a.m., put the emergency plan in place, and we started getting the kids out of the cabin. And they all lived because we followed the plan. The sheriff wasn't asleep. The mayor had stayed up. Everybody was ready. They were all doing what they needed to do so that lives would be saved. Anyway, if you have not subscribed to YouTube, subscribe to YouTube. We do talk about lots of topics. If you'd like to be a member, we have almost daily coffee chats. And we will be having one in the morning. And tomorrow we're going to be talking about the trial that's currently happening about a dentist whose wife was poisoned by arsenic and cyanide, but his defense is that she poisoned herself, even though she also went to the hospital 3 times over 10 days. So that'll be an interesting trial to follow. Anyway, see you later.